Hi everybody, it's Jenn from McCreath. It is August, what is it, the 9th today? 2022. Just watched the Lex Luger A&E bio. It reminded me that I did a video about a year ago after they did the Ultimate Warrior bio, and I broke down the 1990 Ultimate Warrior WWF Championship run and pointed out why I thought there were several mistakes made. And I even mentioned back then that the problem was that Vince McMahon has just lost Hulk Hogan, and he tried to turn the Warrior into Hulk Hogan 2.0. And when he couldn't do that, he tried to turn Lex Luger into Hulk Hogan 2.0. And it just seems that Warrior and Luger get painted with the same brush, that they didn't have the right attitude because they didn't grow up loving the wrestling business. They grew up doing other stuff. Luger was a football player. First time he ever went to see a live professional wrestling match, he was actually in the match. So no, he was not a fan. He was a bodybuilder, and so was the Warrior. And having watched the Luger, I mean, the guy's obviously had an up and down life. But in terms of what he's done in wrestling, the amount of time he was booked at the top of the promotion that he was working for, the world titles, the tickets that people bought to see this guy participate in, and the fact that he was on the top of the business in both WWF and WCW for many years. This guy deserves a little bit more respect, and he's right up there with the people that should be in the Hall of Fame who aren't, if you take that Hall of Fame thing seriously. And so let's take a look at Lex Luger. What do we do here? We got this new guy out of football, goes down to Florida, learns how to wrestle, and catches the eye of someone in Jim Crockett promotion. And they say, we better, I think it was Flair. Flair went down to Florida to wrestle Luger for a 60-minute draw in Luger's rookie year. And as they say, Flair can wrestle a broomstick for an hour and make it look interesting, but apparently this match, I think it might have been on the Super Clash, AWA Battle of the Belts, or one of those silly little shows, I can't remember now, but Flair was impressed enough to say, get this guy up here to Crockett, bring him into the Carolinas, and we'll put him in the Horsemen, and we'll groom him into becoming the next big star. And a year later, as pay-per-view is in its infancy stages, Vince McMahon has just done a couple of WrestleManias, and WCW had put out their first pay-per-view in '87, the Starrcade. And so what do they do in '88? They have Great American Bash and Starrcade, and it's who's on top with Flair? It's Luger. And Luger could have won the belt. The finish was that Luger had Flair in the rack, and it was essentially over. And the referee rang the bell. Everyone thought Luger was being declared the winner, but he had a cut on his eye. And they said, no, he's bleeding too much, we've got to stop the match. So that really pissed everyone off. Little would we know that this would become a theme of Luger coming oh so close so many times to winning titles, only for whoever in the booking to say no. So he's a good foot soldier. Okay. Flair moves on to whatever he wants to do next. '89, Lex focuses on U.S. title and winning that title and holding that title for, I think, 500 plus days. He dropped it to Michael Hayes, but won it right back a couple weeks later. And he continued to have matches with both faces and heels. Lex worked better as a heel, I think we all agree with that. But when he was the face chasing Flair in '88, I think it looked okay. So we get towards the end of '89. Sting is supposed to work. Sting is now in the Horsemen. The Horsemen are faces. And Luger's heel, which is really bizarre. And they have this silly thing. And the Starrcade 89 was a big disappointment. It was supposed to be a round robin showing off who the best wrestlers are. And you had Flair, Sting, Luger, and Muta wrestle a round robin. Luger had a nice win over Sting, but somehow due to the way that the points worked, there was a count out in one of the matches, and it ended up Sting winning the tournament over Flair, so Sting was granted a shot at the world title. Flair didn't want to fight his fellow Horseman because he was afraid of him, so the Horsemen all turned on Sting, and that was supposed to set up a big Flair-Sting promo in which Sting would then beat Flair for the belt. Luger would continue on as U.S. champ, but Sting got hurt. He tried to climb a cage and tore his ACL for real. So they had to make a quick pivot. Oh my God, what were we going to do? We were going to swap the belt. Well, let's turn Luger face. And after being this great heel for a year and a half, got this Wrestlewar, their number 2 show on the year behind Starrcade. Flair Luger go 38 minutes in an amazing match. Flair once again in Luger's rack, getting ready to submit, and the other Horsemen come and interfere. They beat up Sting at ringside. Luger puts down Flair and goes outside of the ring and helps fight off the Horsemen so that Sting doesn't get hurt. And of course Luger gets counted out, so once again Luger's screwed out of the world title. Then they booked a cage match, where of course there'd never be any type of DQ finish in a cage match, right? So of course, what do we have the next pay-per-view? We have a DQ in a cage match, and once again Luger gets screwed because Ole Anderson did one of these cages that lifts up and down. So it's supposed to be Flair and Luger in a cage, no DQ, but they lifted up the cage and the Horsemen all beat up on Luger. The match was thrown out, and so much for that. So Luger still can't get his hands on the world title. Then Sting's finally ready to go, so Sting comes in and Sting wins the belt. Luger stays as a face as Sting beat Flair at the Great American Bash 1990, and he would go on to be booked in some questionable feuds. The Black Scorpion and Sid Vicious would be his first 2 big foes. And meanwhile, Luger was a babyface U.S. champion, dropping and then winning back the U.S. title for a 4th time with Stan Hansen, of all people. Sting wasn't drawing. Not necessarily because Sting wasn't a draw, but I think that because the Black Scorpion thing was pokey bullcrap. It was actually Al Perez under a mask, and it just wasn't going to sell out buildings. People want to see established, credible stars, not some jobber under a mask. And Sid was a big musclehead and an excellent attraction type of guy, but he wasn't going to draw money as a pay-per-event main event against Sting. Halloween Havoc, they did the clever finish where Barry Windham dressed up as Sting and they kidnapped the real Sting, and they had Sid pin Windham, and everyone thought that Sid had won the belt because he'd pinned Sting, but he'd actually pinned Windham. Sting finally comes back and they restart the match. Kind of a cheesy finish. They go Black Scorpion again, but instead of Al Perez, it's Ric Flair. And the mask comes off, and that's the end of the Black Scorpion. Who else? Luger wrestled The Undertaker, who was still Mean Mark back then, successfully defending the U.S. title. And then we go into 91. They pivot, give the belt back to Flair at a house show over New Year's. Then Jim Hurt comes in and asks Flair to cut his hair and become Spartacus and all those silly things. Flair says, I'll cut my hair, but no, I'm not going to be Spartacus. Then they go over to Japan. They have this super show. Sting wrestles Muta. Flair wrestles Fujinami. The Steiners wrestle Hase and Sasaki. and I can't remember who else was over there. I think the Steiners had somebody there. Probably the best co-promotion. I mean, sometimes these things work out, sometimes they don't. Especially back in those days, you take the American companies and the Japanese companies and try to get them to work together. They do it again in 95, and it wasn't really that great, but this was a great show, the 91. But yeah, so Flair, and this is where it gets really tricky, because the NWA and the WCW, they kind of split and evolve into two separate organizations. So Flair technically loses one of the two belts to Fujinami while retaining the other. Then they come back to the US and have a rematch. And it's billed as a unification match in one way and just a regular WCW match in the other way. Meanwhile, Luger is patiently sitting around, still US champion. I don't even remember who he wrestled on those shows, or if he was even there. And of course, a couple weeks later, Flair's contract is up. Hurd wants to cut his money. Flair says, pay me what I'm worth or I'm out of here. I own the title belt. You gotta give me a refund on this deposit I put on this belt. It all falls apart. Flair was supposed to drop the title. Once again, it was going to be Flair and Luger. This would be Luger's big moment. Finally, he's going to get his third feud with Flair, and this time he was going to win it. But then Flair leaves and takes the belt with him to WWF. Now you got Bobby Heenan and Ric Flair saying they're the real world champion. 2 weeks before Lex Luger is supposed to become the WCW heavyweight champion, the crowning achievement he's worked so hard for, against Flair. Instead, he gets Barry Windham in a cage match in which Luger turns heel during the middle of that match when a heel manager comes out to give him a pep talk, Harley Race. So Luger's world title win was very anticlimactic in a boring match with Barry Windham, who didn't really want to be there, and people were chanting "We want Flair" during the whole show. They were so pissed off that Flair had left the company, and it didn't matter who was in the ring. Luger, Windham, could have been anyone. They were just going to shit all over it. Went down as generally regarded as one of the worst WCW pay-per-views. Luger finally gets the belt. Yay, we're excited, but wait a minute, now he's heel. What does that mean? He's not going to be the superhero heel. He's going to the hero. He's going to be, as a champ, he's going to be a chicken shit guy. He's got Harley Race. He's got Curtis Hughes. He's got everybody out there. And instead of fighting off all the villains, he's now going to try to find if there's any faces left to fight. Sting, I don't know where Sting is. Somehow it's Rick Steiner becomes the first to come out and say, "What's wrong with you, Lex Luger? You changed your attitude." So they go at it at the Clash of Champions. Then Ron Simmons gets put in there for a title match, but at that time Ron was not a serious contender. Of course he would be a few years later. Life was essentially made easy for Luger. As a heel, Curtis Hughes would interfere in his matches and help him defeat people. And then he just sort of disappeared and stayed off TV till Super Brawl. Starrcade 91. I think they did a Battle Bowl that year. And Sting won it. They're definitely preparing for Sting to make the comeback. Sting and Luger would get their hands on each other in a battle royal, and that would lead to Sting beating Luger in 92 for Sting's second run at the title. And now it's Luger's time to leave and go up to Vince McMahon. And he had this bodybuilding gimmick going on, and then he was supposed to come into the World Bodybuilding Federation. Then he had a motorcycle accident, but eventually he was brought in as a wrestler, as a heel, and a completely different gimmick, the narcissist, but it was still someone. It was Lex Luger. By then, people knew who he was. The NWA had become the WCW, and it wasn't just a regional Carolina, Georgia promotion. It was a group that had gone national, so everyone knew who this guy was. They were going to take him seriously. The goofy narcissist gimmick was a bit over the top, but they did put him in some serious programs. Right away, he was wrestling Mr. Perfect at WrestleMania, and it was setting up to Luger was essentially being groomed to be a top heel, but at the same time they had this heel champion, Yokozuna, 600 pounds, Samoan pretending to be Japanese. Hogan was on his way out of the company. Savage, I guess, when did he leave? He was still there, but he was kind of commentating. Anyway, the narcissist kind of fell flat, and they said, well, let's turn Lex face. We need an American hero who could stand up to Yokozuna, because he had just squashed Hacksaw Jim Duggan, and he had put in Hulk Hogan. Yeah, this was, Hogan beat Yokozuna, and then Yokozuna beat him again, and Hogan had left the company literally after King of the Ring. So, and Bret Hart was, for whatever reason, after all the hard work he'd done, all the effort to build up Bret and Shawn and some of these smaller guys as credible world champions, they pivoted back to the big muscle guys. And so we had this summer-long chase of Lex doing the Lex Express bus tour, shaking hands, kissing babies. Something, I guess, that he didn't feel comfortable with, but he did the best he could. I thought he was they built him up as a legitimate next top face. And then you have the Summerslam match. He wins by countout and celebrates for some reason, even though he didn't win the title. And then that basically killed his character. And that was the stupidest mistake ever made with Lex Luger. You put the belt on Lex there, you've got something really good going. You can have a rematch with Yoko at Survivor Series, and you can knock him out again. You can feed Lex. I don't know, who else was in there? 93, they were running out of heels. Shawn Michaels, was he face or heel then? You had Kevin Nash. You know, a lot of people Luger could have worked with. Or you could set up a face versus face. I mean, the excuse was they wanted to keep the Luger-Yoko chase going beyond SummerSlam and into the fall and into the winter. They had a Royal Rumble where Luger and Bret went over the ropes at the same time, so they were both going to get a shot at Yoko's title. And it was thought, well, maybe Lex will finally beat Yoko at WrestleMania. But I think what you could have done was had Lex win the title at SummerSlam 98. Maybe face Bret in a face versus face. Have them team up and have Lex turn on Bret. I don't know. Lex was destined to be a heel. Needed to be a heel. But Lex could have given you a decent title run. In the end, the Yoko title run, 93 Survivor Series, is generally remembered for being terrible. I couldn't remember any significant matches there. Yoko was there, but I think he was in a tag. I don't think he defended the belt. His team against Lex's team, and I don't remember. Royal Rumble. Who did he defend the belt against? Undertaker, I think it was a coffin match. And he had like 25 people interfere. It just sucked. And it just ruined Luger. To the point where he said, fuck this, I'm out of here, I'm going back to WCW, even if they're only going to pay me a minimum salary. He shows up on the first Nitro, and he goes on to have 3 or 4 really good years when WCW gets really hot. WCW versus NWO, you got Luger showing up, Luger and Hogan swapping the world title, and doing all sorts of neat things. The Wolfpack in the end, Luger had 2 very short title runs in WCW, none with the WWF. But he kind of feels like he belongs up there at the top with the guys who did win all those titles. How many titles does Sting have? If you count them up between WCW and TNA, he's probably got at least 10. Hogan had, 12 title reigns. Of course, the first one lasted more than all the others combined. And then the titles got watered down, so it doesn't really matter, really, how many they all had. But you got, if Hogan and Warrior and Sting and Savage, and then you get the Halls and the Nashes, if those guys are in the Hall of Fame, then so is Luger, because he elevated not just the companies when he was on top, but he elevated the U.S. title for all those years. He helped make other guys look important, and even in WCW's dying days, he was still there. He was motivated, in great shape. He had the TV title and the tag title. Luger and Sting worked as a team. Luger and a young giant, Paul White, worked together. And yeah, I know, after Luger's wrestling days were done, he had some struggles in his personal life, and he got into some drugs, and we all know what happened with Miss Elizabeth Hewlett, better known as Randy Savage's former wife. And of course Luger got himself into other legal troubles. And but if we're looking at the guy's wrestling career, he was really good. He looked great in terms of a physique. He wasn't the greatest technical wrestler ever, but he worked hard enough to improve that he could give you those 25, 30-minute main event matches that you'd come away saying, that was worth it. That was an awesome show. I got my money's worth. And he didn't always have his heart into it, I don't think, but when he had to deliver a passionate promo, they came across as genuine. And when I think about growing up in my childhood and watching wrestling into my teens, and I had to write down the 10 wrestlers that had the biggest impact on my reason of my interest in the sport. Why did I turn the TV on every Saturday in the 80s and then every Monday night in the 90s? Lex Luger is one of those main reasons to watch. So this guy deserves more credit than he gets. He's definitely a Hall of Famer, and I have him in my list of top 10 champions from, I guess, what we'll call the golden age, the golden era of wrestling. And there you go. My thoughts on the Lex Luger bad booking. The last video I called was the Ultimate Warrior's 1990 title run, hurt by bad booking. Definitely Luger was hurt by the 93 SummerSlam loss. I think that could have really, I mean, the WWF went in the toilet in 84, 94, 95, 96, to the point where WCW was a serious threat to put them out of business. And if they had done a better job booking Lex Luger and kept him in that company in 95, they wouldn't have had to deal with that. And instead they put 46-year-old Bob Backlund back on in the WWF. Hadn't wrestled in like 15 years. They had him win the world title, and then Kevin Nash won it as Diesel, but nobody cared. They flip-flopped around. Psycho Sid had come back and forth a few times. WCW, WWF. Shawn Michaels with a belt was a Vince McMahon project for 1996, and he didn't really draw either. They brought in Vader to fight Shawn, and then that match didn't live up to expectations. It was the age of the terrible gimmick. You had Kane wrestling as Isaac Yankem DDS, for crying out loud. You had T.L. Hopper, the plumber, and you had Duke the Dumpster Drozy, the garbage man. You had all these silly factions that were like jobbers. You had Savio Vega and 3 other guys with this Bariqua gimmick. You had DOAs, whatever they were called, Skull, Chains. The Harris Brothers and the fake Undertaker were supposed to be taken seriously. It sucked. You had Pig Farmers and the Godwins. Barry Horowitz went from jobber to superstar. I mean, come on. Total flop out. Missed opportunity. I really think that if you'd gone with Lex as champ in 93, things would have been different. He never would have left in 95. And who knows? We might still see the NWO. But if Lex stayed, a more mature Lex taking on a more mature Kevin Nash, Scott Hall. How about Lex working with Stone Cold Steve Austin? That would have been interesting. In 97 maybe? Hard to say. I get that Flair didn't want to... He made a promise to give the belt to Sting, but Sting wasn't ready in 90. Put it on Luger. He had had more time in the main event. I think if you'd put the belt on Luger back in 1990 at Wrestlewar, you win that match, you have a rematch with Flair in the cage at Capital Combat, maybe you have a screwy finish and Flair wins the belt back. Somehow you work it in that Sting, they always wanted Flair to pass the torch to Sting, but maybe it should have been Luger that passed the torch to Sting. I don't know. He eventually did 2 years later, but then it was 2 years too late. What are your thoughts, folks, on Lex Luger? Did he get a bit of a raw deal there? Do you think he could have drawn as a world champion in 88, in 90, or 93? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, Lex, a lot of the wrestlers from that era got into pills and drugs, and they certainly don't support or endorse the criminal offenses, the drinking and driving, the breaches of probation, and the domestic violence accusations. All bad. The situation when Elizabeth died in Lex Luger's apartment, or I think they were living together, it was their apartment. Bottom line, Liz was a big girl. She made her own decisions. She wasn't coerced or anything. She openly was taking the pills and the drugs as many as Lex was, and it was a tragic incident and sad. But it definitely was not murder or anything like that. And I don't think Lex should be held responsible for Liz's death. I don't think that's a good enough reason to say this guy's not a Hall of Famer. His body of work for 15 years in the industry is a top main event draw. The body was a 10 out of 10. Ring work, stick work, maybe 6 to 7 out of 10. But there was enough there. People paid to see this guy wrestle. And yeah, don't forget Lex Luger. Read his book. It's an interesting story. The guy had a stroke. He spent a year not being able to move. He's in his 60s now, and he's become a lot more humble, and has found peace in his life. I think religion is part of that. I don't want to get in on that, but... And from watching last night, everyone's saying if you actually... Lex may seem like he's an arrogant prick, but behind the scenes he was actually a pretty great guy. He was just a little antisocial and didn't really warm up to the fans and doing meet and greets. But business-wise, when he was in the ring, he was there to work hard. So yeah, Vince, you fucked up James Hellwig, you fucked up Larry Full, and well, he still managed to beat WCW because they beat themselves, but yeah, mistakes made. Why try to recreate Hulk Hogan with other people? You finally realized when you couldn't recreate Hulk Hogan, and when Hulk Hogan left and when WCW, well, You created the Attitude Era. Steve Austin, Triple H, The Rock, Undertaker, Mankind, even yourself, Mr. McMahon. And you completely turned it into a crash TV, much watched program. And that was enough to get WCW out of business. So, in the end, I guess you got to figure it out there for a while. But, yeah, those two wrestlers, it just kind of leaves me still 30 years later saying, that could have been so much better. Anyway, any thoughts about Lex Luger? Post them in the comments section. Or film your own video. Why not? Let's talk about the greatness of some of these pro wrestlers who entertained us and worked so hard back in the day. Thanks for watching, everyone.